We're back on Physique Science Radio. I'm your host, Lane Norton, and this week, I'm afraid our co-host, Sohi, is out. She's not going to be able to make it. She's doing some wedding planning stuff, so I'm afraid you guys have to listen to my voice even more than normal, but that's okay. I've got a very, very exciting guest for us, the defender of freedom himself, Dr. Michael Zourdos of Florida Atlantic University. Mike did his PhD at Florida State University, which is where I first met Mike when I was doing a conference up there. And Mike is one of the foremost researchers in the world on periodization training. So we'd like to welcome him to the show. Mike, how are you doing? Doing great, Lane. It's an honor, so I really appreciate you having me on. Absolutely, absolutely. We definitely were going to get you early into the rotation. I was thinking about Dr. Lineky the other day, and how at our camps he always laments the fact that there are 5,000 nutrition questions to every one training question. And I realized the first 4 episodes we'd done of this radio show were on nutrition. I said, oh, because I thought about having, and I will have Dr. Bill Campbell on. I was going to have him talk about meal frequency, but then I said, we really ought to get a training show done here because otherwise Dr. Lineky may start sending me hate mail. So that's how this transport. And I'd love to get him on the show with blood flow restriction, but I think periodization is obviously a nice introductory kind of training show. So, but for those of our listeners who may not know more about you, can you kind of give just a real brief introduction of who you are, why did you get into weightlifting, and what led you to become, to get your PhD and eventually become a professor? Sure. So, I started off lifting, I guess, like everybody else, just, wanted to get bigger and stronger. I was really young. I remember I was in 8th grade when I first started. And but my sport was soccer, so I always played soccer. Went to college, started my freshman year in 2003 at a small school called Marietta College. Played NCAA Division III soccer for 4 seasons up there, and that was great. But was always in the weight room, was always training, pretty unlike a soccer player. So I decided to switch my major to exercise science so I could really learn about it. I remember at the time being in class and asking questions, Dr. So-and-so, let's say somebody were to do 10 sets of 2 on this exercise, how would that correspond with muscle growth? And their response would usually be something like, Mike, that's very interesting, but why don't you keep those questions to yourself until after class? So after that, I went on and I was a graduate assistant strength coach at Salisbury University for a guy named Matt Nine. A great guy, really helped me get my start. And from then on, I enjoyed that. But ultimately, I would get a lot of questions after I finished my master's from my athletes, about the mechanisms behind what we were doing. And I just didn't feel that I had good answers. I felt that my answers were very, very coach-like in terms of this is what has always been done. This is what I've been told, so this is what we're doing. And I didn't feel comfortable with that. And before Lane knew who I was, I certainly stalked him online, and I knew what he was doing. And so I have to pay homage to him as he was the guy at the time doing his PhD and doing things that we all wanted to do. So contacted Florida State, excellent research mentor, Dr. Kim, who I look up to, and he accepted me down there, and I was able to get into it, man. So, I was able to really make my research what I wanted to do, and I have a lot of people to thank for that. It's interesting. I actually just shared an article on my page the other day, and from Mark Ripto, and while I would disagree with Ripto on a lot of things, it was basically an article about how most NCAA and pro strength and conditioning coaches are essentially terrible and have no idea what they're doing. And I sat down and started reading the article, and I found myself nodding my head a lot because not that you were terrible when you were a strength and conditioning coach, but that is just, this is the way we're doing it. It's always been done this way. And you need to, what I really loved was him bagging on functional training and this idea that you need to squat on an unstable Bosu ball or something like that, because that will make you a better athlete. It's like people overcomplicate this shit so much. It's like, no, if you want to be better at your sport and, recruit, be more powerful, get stronger, that enables your muscles to produce more force, and practice your skill a lot. So when you do your skill, you do it with more force. It's really quite simple. Yeah, absolutely. I skimmed that article as well, and
I see it both ways. I've been very blessed and fortunate to be around some excellent coaches, like
Yeah, absolutely.
my good friend Matt, who's at Salisbury, Chuck Lobe, who's here at Florida Atlantic, who I love, just does a tremendous job. And these guys really bridge the gap between science and application that you and I like to talk about. But unfortunately, there are individuals that have been in these jobs for a long period of time, as Rip was talking about, that don't apply, either a lot of science or a lot of logic to it. So it goes both ways, and it's certainly that kind of thing in any field. But as you said, Lane, people tend to overcomplicate things. The overarching concept with any type of training and exercise physiology is specificity. If you want to get better at something, you need to practice that. So that's really in any field, you can strip it down to that basic level and have specificity and progressive overload. And if you got those two concepts, you're going to be in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of our listeners, we're actually on video right now, so I can see Mike and he can see me. So Mike is definitely somebody who practices science and application. His shirt right now is wearing his Florida State powerlifting shirt, and it's covered in chalk. So I know he's just finished squatting and deadlifting. So Mike, so you're also a competitor. You compete in powerlifting. Would you mind telling our listeners what some of your best lifts are?
Sure. I compete as either a 74 kilogram, 163 pound, or 83 kilogram, 182 pound lifter in the USAPL Federation. My best lift is out of the three is my squat.
Big surprise.
The best squat I've recorded in competition is 230 kilos, 507 pounds, weighing about 77 kilos, or about 169 pounds or so that day. So that was done about a year ago here at a meet that we hosted, Lane, that you also participated in. So the rest of my lifts are kind of mediocre, and that 507-pound squat is certainly far from world class, but it is a lift I'm proud of, and hopefully we can keep making progress.
Yeah, that's almost 3 times body weight, correct?
Yeah, something like that. I study exercise physiology. I'm not in the math department, but hopefully that's about right. Yeah, so about 507 at a little under 170. So pretty proud of that lift.
Yeah, very as well. You should be. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our topic today, which is periodization.
Sure.
So can you just tell our listener, you touched on it a little bit in terms of progressive overload and specificity. But can you touch on, what is periodization? Because we've got a lot of people out there, including a lot of coaches, who couldn't spell periodization, much less implement it. So if you could give us kind of a basic run through of what periodization is, and then we'll kind of break down different types from there, that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. So a general definition of periodization could be as follows. Periodization is varying training variables such as volume and intensity over the course of time. So a non-periodized program is very simple. We use examples as sets and reps because they're very easy to quantify. So if we take no periodization, you start training today and you have a competition 16 weeks from now, and you do 3 sets of 6 that entire time and you never change. That's a non-periodized program. Now, logic dictates to us, without even looking at any research, that that's not going to be the appropriate way to progress. If you're a beginner, and we'll talk about varying training statuses later on, but if you're a beginner and you're starting out and you have progressive overload, will you make progress with a non-periodized program? Of course. However, a periodization program would be something if you started 16 weeks from now, and let's say every 4 weeks you varied. You were doing sets of 10 during the first 4 weeks, then you move to sets of 8 the next 4, then sets of 6. So as your volume or the amount of repetitions you were doing decreased, your intensity or the percentage of 1RM that you would utilize would increase. So in short, non-periodized is no variation. Periodization is essentially just variation. Now within that, and I'm sure Lane will ask me, we have varying concepts, whether it's linear periodization, black periodization, undulating periodization, and so forth.
Yeah, and the example you just gave, I think, would be kind of an example of linear periodization, correct? So that's...
Yes, sir. Yeah, it'd be linear periodization. So if you were to break down training, you could quantify different periods of time and have terminology for this. So, for example, about a month, or let's say 4 to 6 weeks of training, we would call a mesocycle. So linear periodization really dictates varying these repetition ranges across different mesocycles, meaning if you did hypertrophy type training for one mesocycle, for example, 4 weeks, strength training for one mesocycle, about 4 weeks, and then power training from one mesocycle about 4 weeks. So that would be a gradual decline in volume and a gradual increase in intensity.
Okay, so and let's define those real quick. So hypertrophy would be like a 10 to 15 repetition range, that sort of thing. Strength, you'd be looking at, anywhere from probably 1 to 5 reps would be my guess. And then power would be in that lower rep range as well, but with lighter weight and done for speed.
It'd be for explosiveness. So, and that's how we would define power. And there's different recommendations based upon sports to define power. But those would be the traditional, and I say traditional because I'm sure we'll talk about this as well. The traditional recommendations for hypertrophy are in the moderate to high repetition range, and then strength would be in the lower repetition range. So in a traditional linear model, yes, you would start with hypertrophy type of training first, or higher volume training, gradually decline over the course of various mesocycles, and intensity would start low during mesocycle 1 and gradually increase as you reach your competition.
Interesting. And so there's also what's called now, there's linear periodization has been shown to be superior to non-periodized programs in terms of increasing strength and performance and hypertrophy in intermediate to advanced people. However, also has its drawbacks, correct, when you're comparing to something like a non-linear periodized training program.
It certainly does. And whenever I start off a talk, I always pose a question that Lane actually posted recently, and I was grateful that he did. And that question is, to ask, not does it work, but is it optimal? Now, when I ask this question, I say this because we have to realize that optimal is unattainable. We ask this question because it always provokes more research, more teaching, more learning, more discussion. We know we can never reach optimal. It doesn't exist. We can't get there. But the point of the question is to allow us to keep discussing things and hopefully moving forward. So in trained lifters, linear periodization will show superior results to no periodization. However, that certainly doesn't mean that a linear periodization protocol is the optimal or best protocol. The linear periodization protocol still has drawbacks. So since the variation, as we just discussed, is only about one mesocycle or every 4 to 6 weeks, while that's more variation than no periodization, it's still very infrequent, only 4 to 6 weeks. So that's when we move into various models such as weekly undulating periodization, or more specifically daily undulating periodization, where we would undulate or change volume, intensity, and repetition ranges every single training session. And then there's really endless possibilities within those concepts to design training protocols.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so a lot of times people will ask me, when Mike and I are talking, we're talking about concepts too. It's important to understand it's not a set routine. You could do linear periodization with 15 reps, then 10 reps, and 5 reps. You could do it with 40, 20, 10. You could do it with 10, 8, 6. You could do it all different ways, right? So it's important to understand that the amounts of ways to implement periodization are endless. But the important point is that you are doing some sort of programmed changes in your training that it's not just haphazard where, like the typical bodybuilding I did a hack squat yesterday, so I'm going to confuse my muscle, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to do, one-legged squats on a Bosu ball. You know what I mean? So that's not periodization. That's buffoonery.
No, absolutely not. And this brings up a larger point. Now, if we look at the scientific literature, as Lane just said, it gives us a concept. So the concept is more variation is going to be superior to less variation in terms of when you vary volume, intensity, and so forth. However, that doesn't mean you should take a study and perform the protocol the exact way it was written in that study. That study likely had to make concessions to design that protocol for feasibility of research. Therefore, we take a concept, undulating periodization, and then we have to apply it to the specific lifter. So this brings us to start talking about design. As Lane said, there are endless possibilities. So let's take a basic daily undulating periodization training block. Remember, our concept of daily undulating means that we alter repetitions or volume and intensity every session. Now, we take a frequency of 3 times a week. Let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You don't have to train 3 times a week, right? We will talk about that in a moment. but it's very easy to quantify when we say this. So 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Let's say Monday you were doing hypertrophy training, right? Wednesday you were doing power training, Friday you were doing strength training. That is daily undulating periodization. Now the possibilities of the specific repetition ranges you use are absolutely endless, right? So I look at it, there are 2 ways to design a DUP block, right? Monday hypertrophy, Wednesday power, Friday strength. That's what I like to call undulating the training phases, right? 1 distinct hypertrophy, 1 distinct power, 1 distinct strength day. That's option 1. Option 2 is what I like to call undulating the repetitions, meaning the repetition ranges don't have to fit neatly into hypertrophy, strength, or power, but it is still undulating periodization. For example, on Monday, if we did 15 repetitions, on Wednesday, if we did 10 repetitions, and on Friday, if we did 5 repetitions. If you note, both the 10 and 15 are within the hypertrophy range, but because we have an undulation of 15, 10, and 5, the literature still classifies this as daily undulating periodization. So, option 1, undulate the typical training phases. Option 2, undulate the repetitions. Then, within that, especially option 2, undulating the reps, think about this. You could have an undulation pattern of 15, 10, and 5 throughout the week. It could be 10, 5, and 3. It could be 8, 6, and 4. It could be 5, 3, and 1. It never ends, right? And that is only a frequency of 3 times a week. Somebody will say, hey, I've been doing this for a while, but I can't do DUP anymore. So I can't train 3 times a week anymore, so I can't do DUP. I have to do something else. Okay. How many days a week can you train? You can train twice? Perfect. We're going to do 10 reps on Monday. We're going to do 5 reps on Friday. Perfect. That's daily undulating periodization. That's the concept. So the beauty of it is you pick how many days a week you can train, and then you work the concept in around what you can commit to.
Yeah.
And then,
and even if you had 2 weeks, I mean, you could still do 3 undulations. You could do Monday of week 1, you do 15 reps. Then Friday do 10. Then Monday do 5, and then Friday do 15, and then Monday do 10, and then Friday do 5. And so you're still undulating the same form. It's just in a different frequency. So, yeah, people like Mike. When Mike gives talks, he'll always get up there and say, "I'm going to give you the DUP," because so many people ask him for the DUP. And you guys, unfortunately, most people have been reading muscle magazines too long. They think that when something has a name to it, that it's just a specific routine, and that's not it at all. This is a particular way of programming, and within that, there are thousands and thousands, probably millions, well, really endless ways you can program it. So we're giving you concepts. So I think this is a good place for a break. So we can have our sponsors get in here. And then when we come back, we're going to talk a little about Mike's research into daily undulating periodization. You're listening to... Hey guys, Lane here. Well, you all know how much I love variety in my diet. I can't stand eating the same bland food every single day. That's why I love www.myoatmeal.com. It's an amazing website where you can go and customize oatmeal. I know. Why would I want to go customize oatmeal? I can eat it right out of the bag. Well, let me tell you why. MyOatmeal.com has 22 billion combinations of flavors and ingredients. You heard me right. 22 billion combinations. Whether you're picking out a pre-made blend or making your own customized blend, they have all kinds of flavors. Want red velvet cake? No problem. Snickerdoodle? You can make it happen. Butter rum? Oh yeah. Cheesecake? You can get it done. And you have all kinds of additives you can add. Apples, raisins, pears, nuts, all kinds of seeds. And you can sweeten it any way you want. Need to eat gluten-free? No problem. They've got it. The best part of it all? The macros are listed as you're customizing your blend, and they change depending on which ingredients you add. Eating a little bit lower carb? No problem. Choose ingredients that make your carb count lower. Need more protein? Add higher protein ingredients. You can customize your blend to make it almost any breakdown that you want, and the prices and macros change as you change your blend. So go on over to www.myoatmeal.com and check out some of the blends that have already been made, or be adventurous and make your own. That's myoatmeal.com. Check it out, guys. Hey guys, one of the things that's always on my mind is how can I give back to the industry that has done so much for me? That's why we formed the BioLane Foundation. The BioLane Foundation is a philanthropic initiative to raise money for grad school level research that is going to contribute to the fitness industry. And 100% of all your donations will be paid out to students. If you'd like to donate, you can go to biolane.com, click on the About tab, and click on BioLane Foundation, and you can put your donation in through there. Or if you're a student and you'd like to apply for a grant, go to biolane.com, click the About tab, BioLane Foundation, and you can find the applications online there. Thank you guys so much, and I'm looking forward to all the great research that comes from these donations. You're listening to Physique Science Radio with Lane Norton and Sohee Lee. If you like what you hear and you'd like to learn more about us and read some of our articles, please visit my website at www.biolane.com and Sohee's website at soheefit.com. Thanks guys, we appreciate you listening and hope to hear more from you in the future. We're back on Physique Science Radio. We're talking to my buddy, Dr. Mike Zourdos at Florida Atlantic University, coming to you live, well, not live because this is recorded, but right now I'm live in his office at Florida Atlantic University talking to him. So, Mike, you talked about undulating repetition schemes with DUP or even undulating the phases. You've actually done specific research into undulating the phases. Can you talk about what your research was and what you guys found?
Sure, absolutely. So our study was the first study in trained individuals to compare two different models of daily undulating periodization. So if we remember back to our question, not does this work, but is it optimal, we continue to build our case. Linear periodization is superior to no periodization. Undulating periodization is superior to linear periodization. So is the current model that exists in the literature of daily undulating periodization the most optimal protocol of all time? Of course not. That's ridiculous. So we have to continue to try and optimize the model of DUP that is in the literature. So our study was the first in trained individuals, and we used the powerlifting team and weightlifting clubs at Florida State University, and we had two different models of daily undulating periodization. So if you recall, option one was to undulate the phases. So far in the literature, and we call this the traditional DUP model, so far in the literature, the traditional DUP model has always existed, which on Monday, we'd have a hypertrophy day. On Wednesday, you would have a strength day, and on Friday, you would have a power day. So hypertrophy, strength, and power order throughout the week. Now, let's take a look at this traditional model of DUP, if you will. Think about your own training, and think about what hypertrophy is. Hypertrophy is high volume. So let's say 5, 6, 7 sets of 10, a high damaging protocol that you would have. Now, that's on Monday. Strength training is your heaviest day. That's on Wednesday. That hypertrophy day, that causes a lot of damage and a lot of soreness. So if you're really doing this damaging protocol, as is done in the literature, and then only 48 hours later, you're expected to lift 85, 90% for maximal repetitions, ask yourself, are you going to be very good at that? Probably not, right? You're still probably going to have a lot of damage and fatigue and soreness only 48 hours later. So our model, what we call the modified model, it aimed to have more separation between hypertrophy and strength. So the traditional model, again, hypertrophy Monday, strength Wednesday, power Friday. We kept hypertrophy on Monday and then moved the strength day all the way to Friday and inserted the power day in the middle of the week. So in the modified model, we had 96 hours rest between hypertrophy and strength, but we kept the 3-day-a-week frequency with the power or speed day to still allow for skill acquisition and more training volume. So our question was, a research question, in the modified model, when there's 96 hours rest between hypertrophy and strength, as opposed to 48 hours rest in the traditional hypertrophy strength power model, would there be more recovery and more total volume performed when there was more separation, right? And I think that seems pretty logical. If you have 96 hours rest and we say go in on the strength day, and I want you to perform as many repetitions as you can at a given intensity, will you perform more volume? And we found that the modified model, when hypertrophy and strength were spread out, did perform more volume, and that led to more strength. So this brings up a bigger question. People will say, okay, so your modified model, right, of hypertrophy, power in the middle, and then strength on the end of the week. Well, this is the optimal model of DUP and the most optimal model of training that you can do. And when somebody says this to me, I almost have a heart attack. And I say, no, that's not at all what we found. All we found is that this model provides superior training volume than another model. Now, volume is the factor of volume and intensity and frequency. Volume is the factor that is most closely associated with muscle growth and increases in strength. Therefore, we found that one model was better than another for volume. However, we might have found the second worst daily undulating periodization model that has ever existed. I highly doubt that. But the point, as Lane said at the beginning of the show, is to take away the concept. The concept is to set your training protocol up so that you can perform the most volume in a given week, or the most volume in a given mesocycle, a month, or over the course of a year. Not the most volume in a day. Anybody can go to the gym and do 20 sets of 20 today, but you're not going to be walking, let alone lifting weights for a long time after that.
That's an interesting point, Mike. I always, when I give talks, I talk about the hierarchy of what's important, okay?
Yep.
And when I talk about nutrition, I always say, I think I talked about this in previous episodes, that hard work and consistency. Now I know you eat all the macros, hitting your daily macros consistently over the course of time is the most important thing in terms of making body composition improvements with regards to nutrition. Now, in anything that sabotages that. Okay, so that doesn't mean it's the only thing that has an impact, right? It just means it's the most dominant. Exactly. But that means that you don't want to sabotage your thing that's at the top with something that's of less importance, okay? So I always say, like people say, well, you can't tell me Pop-Tart is better for you than a sweet potato. I said, that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is if having that one Pop-Tart keeps you from going nuts and blowing out your diet, then it's better than trying to consistently just eat sweet potato and chicken, and then when you have one little mistake, you blow out and go crazy, right? So that consistency is more important. So that would be kind of a good analogy to volume here. If volume is most important, then the biggest thing is to make sure you're doing training that is not going to impede your volume accumulation. So people will always say, well, what about training to failure? Training to failure has been shown to have these benefits on muscle hypertrophy. Well, yes, that's true. But if you, for example, go to failure too often, it is going to absolutely impede your total training volume. And therefore, it's going to actually have a negative effect on what you could do muscle growth-wise. And this is why when we talk about when we use failure, and we use it relatively sparingly compared to most training programs, but we will use it because there are benefits to it. But if we're going to do it, it's typically going to be on the last set of an exercise. Because if you think about if you've ever done training to failure, maybe, for example, my squat max is 650, best squat I've ever done in my life. So if I put 500 on, I could probably do 500 for 12, maybe 13 reps if I was fresh. Now, let's say I did that. What would I get the next set? Maybe 6, maybe 7. And then the set after that, maybe 3 or 4. It shows that you pretty much go down kind of linearly after that. Now, what if I had just said, okay, I'm just going to do sets of 10. I'm just going to do sets of 10, keep 2 reps in the tank. I could probably do 5, 6, 7 sets of 10 before I really got to the point where I was going to hit failure. So if I put the failure on the last set, now I get the benefits of volume and the benefits of failure. I know that's kind of an off-topic diatribe, but a lot of people kind of confuse the...
Yeah, so I think, Lane, what you said was really perfectly appropriate. So if we give the example of a daily undulating periodization block with a frequency of 3 times a week with an undulation pattern Monday, Wednesday, Friday of 8 reps, 6 reps, and 4 reps. So let's say we want to figure out what intensity or what percentage of 1RM we want to work at for our 8 repetition sets on Mondays. Now we have 5 sets of 8, and I give you 70%. Well, the lifter might say 70%, hey man, I can do that for 12 to 15 reps. Sure, you can for one set, but if you do that for one set and you get burned out after you do 12 reps on the first, and then you drop to 7 on the second, and then 5 or 6 on the third, and so forth, well, there's 2 problems with this. One, you're probably going to do less volume than if you just repeated that for 8 reps. And 2, you're causing more damage. If you're causing more damage, that's going to fatigue you, and you might not be able to do those, let's say, 6 sets of 6 on Wednesday, and then let's say 7, 8 sets of 4 on Friday. And remember, muscle growth is not mostly related to damage. It doesn't mean it's not important at all, but it's mostly related to training volume. So you want to set that up not to maximize damage, but to maximize volume. Now, there's a few ways to continue to break this down. One thing that we're going to get into is that if you notice, I've been saying a DUP block, meaning that daily undulating periodization and block periodization are not mutually exclusive concepts. Even undulating periodization, block periodization, linear periodization, and autoregulation are not mutually exclusive concepts. So,
Exactly.
right, if we take the concept of daily undulating periodization or periodization in general, people say, oh, periodization doesn't work for me. Yes, it does. Your physiology is not special, right? It works for you. The question is, within a periodization model, what needs to be individualized? Something that needs to be individualized is on Monday, if I say I want to do 8s with 70%, well, some people might be better at performing reps than other, depending on their training status. My colleague here, Dr. Norton, is exceptional at doing repetitions. So if I'm going to program 8s for him, he can do repeated bouts of 8s all day at around 75%, maybe even a little higher. I have some lifters that cannot maintain more than 65% at 8s for multiple sets. There's nothing wrong with either of those. It's just the individual differences in that case. And one way to mitigate going too heavy and causing too much damage is to use auto-regulation within your DUP setup. Auto-regulation on its own is not a theory of training. Rather, auto-regulation can be used to program the exact load and intensity within a periodization model. So, if we have a block of periodization and we call it a volume block, well, auto-regulation is a perfect tool to use because instead of saying, hey, I want to do 5 sets of 8 at 70% on Monday, I can say I'm going to do 5 sets of 8 at an 8 RPE, meaning I feel that I have 2 repetitions left in the tank because it's a volume block, remember. And a volume block is not predicated on going to failure. It's predicated on doing repeated bouts. That way, you ensure that you're staying at least 2 repetitions short of failure, meaning you might increase or decrease the load during the session, but you stay 2 repetitions short of failure. Thus, you know you're not going to beat the hell out of yourself, for lack of a better term, and cause a lot of damage. If you do that, you're doing volume without too much damage, and then you can train again, let's say the squat on Wednesday, because if you're not squatting, what are you really doing with your life? And then you can train that squat again on Friday. Now, what you've also done, in addition to increasing your volume, you've increased your frequency. And make no mistake about it, these lifts, the squat, the bench press, the deadlift, these lifts are skills. And the more that you do them with appropriate volume and periodization, of course, the better that you will get over time. And if you're a bodybuilder and your main goal is muscle growth, if you get better at these lifts, what does that mean? It means you can overload more. If you can overload more, you are doing more volume and you will see more growth. So it's very important about how you break this down. So I know that was a lot in a few minutes there, but the point is we can no longer think about undulating periodization, block periodization, and autoregulation as mutually exclusive concepts. They can and should be integrated together, and this is where our research is going. So I'll stop for a second because I'm sure Lane will have some insight on this, but I do want to get back to how we should progress from week to week in a moment, because all I've really done now is given you, okay, here's 1 week, but how do we progress the intensity and the load from week 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and so forth?
Yeah, good points, Mike. So I have 3 points, and first is, Mike has done my programming before, and I actually worked with Ben Escrow this last for nationals, who obviously, Ben and Mike are two sides of the same coin. They talk every day, and Ben is doing nothing but implementing these things Mike talks about, and we did that for nationals. So ran different training blocks. So as I was progressing, so I do my first 4-week block might have been undulating 10-8 reps with 10-8-6. The next 4-week block was 9-7-5, and then 8-6-4, and then 7-5-3, and down to, by the last block before nationals, I was conservative maxing each week with singles. Yep. And so the purpose was was as the meet built up, as it got closer, I'm getting more specific. I'm increasing the intensity, but I'm still undulating repetition schemes. I'm still getting, some higher-ish reps, even though at the end it's, my high reps are 5 reps. But I think that's what you're talking about there, right, Mike?
Absolutely. There's 2 points on this. One, I do talk to Ben at least once a day, every day, and it's not enough in my opinion. And sometimes I like to stare at the squat rack and imagine that he's staring at the squat rack at the same time. The second point is what you just said, Lane, is that if we think about the concepts of undulating periodization and block periodization, well, within a DUP setup, you can have a volume block and you can have an intensity block. So something like a 10-8-6 undulation pattern would be considered a volume block because with higher repetitions, it's much easier to achieve a higher level of volume. Now, you might do that block or multiple volume blocks when you're 16, 20 weeks out from a competition. As you get closer to that competition, in those last 4 to 8 weeks, you might be doing an intensity block. An intensity block undulation pattern might be something like 6-4-2 or 5-3-1. And again, you can program specific intensities, or you can use an auto-regulation setup on an RPE scale of 1 to 10 to determine that load. And we have to stop and thank our good friend Mike Teixeira for really bringing this RPE scale to light, back about 6, 7, 8 years ago now. He's really the guy at Reactive Training Systems who's doing great things that really brought this scale to light for us. So we have the volume and intensity block. So that's how we can look at the concepts or integrating undulating periodization and block periodization really together in the same training model.
Very cool. Now, I do want to touch on a couple points. When we talk about volume, volume's important, but it's also, some people will hear this and they'll say, well, why don't if volume's the only thing that's important, why don't I just put 100 pounds on the squat bar and do 20 sets of 20? And that's right. Easy, and I'm getting way more volume than going intensity. And I think the point would be that there probably is a minimum intensity threshold where volume becomes the dominant factor. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think that there likely is. I think there is some data, and actually whenever you have Dr. Lineker on, he's been part of some of this research, so he might be a better guy to ask than me. But if you're equating for volume with very, very low loads, some studies do show equal hypertrophy with, let's say, 30, 40, 50% there as opposed to more moderate, 60, 70%. However, this is in untrained individuals. So these are going to be more novice individuals, which brings to a larger point that if you're a novice individual and you're trying to figure out, do I want linear periodization? Do I want undulating periodization? Do I want block periodization? You're thinking too much, right? All you need to do is stay short of failure, have a decent amount of frequency to practice the skill, work on your technique, and lift weights. Your strength will go up and your size will go up a ton. Don't worry about it. Periodization is really not all that important for novice individuals. But getting back to the original point here, in terms of is there an intensity threshold that volume needs to be at, I would say for trained individuals, yes. Can I give you an exact number of 60 or 62 or 57 or 71? I can't. I'm not smart enough to know that. But at a certain point, you are so unspecific to the motor unit recruitment that you need to utilize to lift heavier weights that you might impede some of your strength. And if you're impeding some of your strength, that means you will not be able to progress as much. And if you cannot progress as much, you're not going to overload as much or optimize your volume. So I would suggest that we do need to stay at a certain intensity threshold, whether it's, again, 60, 62, 70, 67. I don't know. At a minimum, though, to continue to progress over time.
Yeah, I 2 points to that. I tell people that I think if you're above 60%, you're probably fine. That
I would agree.
Above 60%, and it may be lower, but I say to be safe, above 60%, I think that volume is definitely the dominant factor, no question. Sure. Now, like you brought up an interesting point, and this before I even knew anything about periodization, I always thought, well, if overload is so important, maybe maybe it's not, strength isn't important in terms of gaining muscle, but if I don't get stronger over time, how am I going to create more overload over time unless, you can only add so much volume, you know what I mean? So it's important to be able to create more overload through strength as well.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked about volume a lot, or total volume, and if you're unfamiliar, the way to calculate that would be sets times repetitions times weight lifted. So volume will certainly be relative to the individual. On an absolute scale, Lane is a lot stronger than me. So his sets times repetitions times weight lifted is going to be more because he's stronger. Now, we have to look at it on a relative scale. If I'm doing 5 sets of 8 at 70% and Lane is doing 5 sets of 8 at 75%, well, Lane is now relatively doing more volume, not just on an absolute scale. So we have to realize that's relative to the individual. So you can't, somebody says, well, how many pounds of volume should a person do each week? I can't say that because it depends on training age and making sure they progress appropriately, right? You might be doing 10,000 pounds of volume with a frequency of twice a week on the squat, and that's great, right? Maybe one day you'll do 50,000 pounds with 4 times a week on the squat, but you can't go from 10,000 to 50,000. You have to progress appropriately and gradually over time. Too much of a jump too soon in your training age is certainly not a good idea for long-term progression. And also comparing within or between individuals, myself to Lane needs to be a relative comparison, not an absolute comparison.
That's actually, we're gonna take a break real quick because I want to expand on that point of progressing appropriately and comparing within your own self and not between other individuals, because that's a great point. So we're gonna take a break. We'll be right back on Physique Science Radio. Hey guys, you know me, and you know I love cooking up macro-friendly option meals. But sometimes when I'm always on the go, that's just not an option. So when I'm on the go or can't cook a meal, I love Quest bars. You know I love protein and fiber, and these are packed with 20 grams of high-quality protein and super high in fiber. And it's easy to stay on target when you've got Quest bars that you can bring with you anywhere. They're delicious compared to other bars that taste like bricks and leave you feeling gassy and bloated. So pick up a bar of Quest bars today at questnutrition.com, GNC, and Vitamin Shop. Also, follow them on Instagram at Quest Nutrition and youtube.com/Quest Nutrition for great recipe ideas to keep you on your goals but eating delicious. Hey guys, many of you out there know I spend a lot of time bagging on bad coaches, and certainly there's more than enough of those to go around. But a lot of times people ask me who I do recommend. Well, one person we can recommend wholeheartedly is Paul Ravella of Physique. Paul has received more referrals from me over the last 2 years than any other coach, and with good reason. Paul is competent, professional, caring, and carries himself with a lot of integrity. If you hire Paul, you're going to be getting the very best at a great value. Paul is also one of my closest personal friends, and I can say with absolute certainty I feel 100% comfortable with referring my closest friends and family to him, because I've done that. Paul Ravella of ProPhysique.com. Check him out, guys. We're back on Physique Science Radio. We're talking periodization, volume, and all things training with Dr. Mike Zourdos. And Mike just brought up a great point about, we've been talking about how great volume is and how great periodization is and all these different things. And, unfortunately, we know that not everybody's going to listen to this whole podcast. And so halfway through, somebody is already starting to do their 50th set of squats because Lane and Mike told me that volume was the most important thing. So I'm going to do volume until the end of time. And so Mike brought up the great point that you have to progress appropriately. You can't just go from squatting 10,000 pounds of volume. And so for those who are unfamiliar, volume is very simple to determine. Volume is weight lifted times number of sets times number of reps. Very, very easy to determine, okay? So I think, if somebody's lifting 10,000 pounds, my squat volume right now is right around 50,000 pounds a week, and I squat 3 times a week. And, if somebody who was used to doing 10,000 pounds went into that, they're likely going to hurt themselves. And what I always tell people, it's kind of like when you're dieting. in that, you want to lose body fat on the maximum amount of calories you can. And then when you stagnate, you should progress appropriately. Like, you don't just want to drop your calories to 1,000 a day just because you hit a plateau. You want to progress, slowly and kind of try to lose at a modest pace. And I think same thing is true for training. If you stagnate, you shouldn't just jump up your volume extremely high. You should progress it appropriately. You should add in a little bit more. Would you agree with that, Mike, based on your experience?
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And for those of you listening overseas, 50,000 pounds is about 23,000 kilos. I would wholeheartedly agree with everything that you just said, Lane, in terms of not progressing too quickly. But if you can make progress and you're a beginner on a certain more minimal amount of volume, that's great. Take advantage of that.
Absolutely.
Take advantage of that, because if you progress too quickly, I promise you it might be nice in the short term, but you're going to regress after that because you're not ready for it. So take advantage of that. One, hey, you're going to have less training days. You're going to spend less time in the gym. You're going to have more time to do other things, right? So take advantage of training with less volume, progress appropriately over time. Because at a certain point, you might progress too quickly and say, well, I have nowhere else to go. I can't increase anything, right?
You want set your volume threshold too high.
Perfect. Exactly, man. So the nutrition kind of synonym you gave works really well with that. But no question, man, if you can make progress on a lower amount of volume and that's going really well for you, do that and ride that out as long as you can, and then progress gradually and appropriately over time.
Exactly. I mean, for example, I use this. I was talking to, it was a different topic, but I was talking to my team, and a lot of them were struggling with comparing themselves to other people and that sort of thing. I say, hey, look, you can't compare yourself to other people, okay? Because, if you want to talk about, you say, well, this isn't fair that it's so hard for me to do this or that. Look, life's not fair, okay? But like, for example, Ben Esco, our good friend, he squats just under 500 pounds at his very best. And he has to squat about 70,000 pounds of volume a week in order to make progress. I can squat 50,000 pounds of volume a week and make progress. And I squat 650. I squat over 150 pounds more than he does. Is that fair? No. But it's also important to note that just because Ben can squat 70,000 pounds of volume per day, it doesn't make sense for me to go do that.
Yep.
And my training sessions are already long enough. I've got other things to do. I love to train, but I will tell you that at a certain point, when you're doing enough volume, it does tend to wear on you. When I was doing that intensity block before nationals, man, I was pretty beat up. So get by on the minimum that you can get by with, because then when you do stagnate, you can add in some more, and it's still not going to feel like you're spending your entire life in the gym. And I think one other thing important to mention, we're talking about squatting and deadlifting, that sort of stuff. You can do daily undulating periodization for Smith machine rows or machine preacher curls.
I think they do that in North Korea.
Yeah. So Mike, those are communist exercises, correct?
Yeah, it's something like that.
Yeah. So, those are for our people who don't believe in freedom, who don't believe in squatting and deadlifting. But the point is, I don't want people to think, well, I can't do DUP because
absolutely, Lane. I think that's a really important point. And I joke about this, and I'm sure myself and you have a reputation of focusing on the main lifts, and I certainly do like to do that. However, somebody will say, oh, I can't do daily undulating periodization anymore because I don't want to do the main lifts right now. And I say, well, hold on. Nothing about the inherent nature of undulating periodization means you have to do the main lifts at all. I recommend that you do, and that's how I like to program it. But all it is saying is that you're varying the training phases, or you're varying your repetition range from day to day. You could do that with any exercise. So, I think that's a misconception, and some of that is probably my fault. But it's a huge misconception. Oh, I can't, I have injury right now. I can't squat, or I can't bench press. So I can't do undulating periodization anymore. No, not at all. You can do that with any exercise. I know I will, undulate with the overhead press with a lot of individuals, and then you can do that. So one thing that I don't talk about a lot is how to incorporate assistance work, especially if you're a bodybuilder. So that assistance work, if you have an undulation pattern of 10-8-6 on the main lifts, that the assistance work you're doing after can follow that same undulation pattern. And the best way to program an assistance work in terms of intensity is that's a perfect time to utilize RPE, right? You're not going to go in and do a max on an isolation exercise, right? If you do, you're going to look silly. So you can utilize an RPE, right, to program in whatever you're doing for any isolation work you add in, or even multi-joint assistance work like an overhead press or a push press, or if you have a front squat after squats or stiff leg deadlifts, RDLs, whatever it might be. So those can follow a similar undulation pattern, and you can use RPE to program those in, and that's a perfect way to do that. Lane, I'm sure you have some other things to get to, but just as I took some notes, I wanted to talk about progression here whenever we have a moment.
Go ahead.
And then also, okay, great. So I want to talk for a second about progressing from week to week, a little bit about integrating the block fashion. And then also, a few minutes ago, Lane said that Mr. Esgro squatted just under 500 pounds. What he was saying is that Ben squats some of the kilos, and Lane and I squat all of the kilos. So if you're looking for information on how to squat only some of the kilos, I think Mr. DeNovo could help you out with that. Love you, buddy. So we talked about progression. The information that we've given so far, I think, is very good. But I do want to talk about going from week to week. So whatever your undulation pattern is, and kind of the home base I like to start with, and that we've talked about, is a frequency of 3 times and an undulation pattern of 8s on Mondays, 6s on Wednesdays, and 4s on Friday. So let's say you're doing that at 70% Monday, 75% Wednesday, 80% on Friday. How do you progress? Okay, we do all that. I finished that first week. How do I choose the load for the second week? You certainly don't keep it the same, because we know we have to integrate progressive overload. So there's a few ways you could do it. One would be to just add an arbitrary amount of weight, saying, okay, I just want to add 5 pounds from week 1 to 2, or 10 pounds from week 1 to 2, and so forth. And you can do that, and that'll work just fine, assuming you've picked those intensities on week 1 that are not too aggressive. You should have room to grow by adding an arbitrary amount of weight. The second way is there's a good paper by Mann and colleagues from 2010, and it coins the terminology with the abbreviation APRE. That stands for Autoregulatory Progressive Resistance Exercise. Now, if you have that undulation pattern of 8-6-4, how this might work is, let's say on that Friday, that day you have 4s, you have what I like to call a plus set, or what many people call AMRAP, or as many reps as possible. Doesn't matter, whatever you want to call it. And on that last set, your target number is 4, but you do as many as you can. So you have a built-in objective progression based upon how you do on that plus set. So let's say your target number is 4, but you get 9 or 10. That's really good. That means you're stronger than what the protocol calls for. Thus, you use the APRE model, meaning 9 or 10 is good. You could work in there with a 9 or 10 repetitions. You will increase the load by 15 pounds for the next week, or about 7.5 kilos. If you get 7 to 8 repetitions, you will increase 5 kilos, or 10 or 11 pounds. And if you get 5 to 6 repetitions, you'll increase 2.5 kilos, about 5 pounds. If you get 4 reps, you'll keep it the same. If for some reason you get less than that, you could always decrease the training load. So the APRE model was shown to be very successful in the literature. So essentially, it's individualized progression based upon how you did that previous week. So way 1 to increase weight with arbitrary amount of weight, let's say 10 pounds from week 1 to 2. And then from 2 to 3, I would probably decrease that, let's say 5 pounds, because adaptations will slow. But you could utilize APRE, and APRE could mitigate taking too aggressive or too small of an increase, because it depends on how you do. So let's say week 1, you get 9 repetitions. You say, great, I got 9 reps on my 4-rep day, thus I'm going to increase by 15 pounds. Let's say you go up by 15 pounds and you get 9 reps again. Well, that's great. You know you got stronger, and you're in the middle of the block. You're fatigued. So you could then go up 15 for the next week. If the next week you only got 5 repetitions, no worries. You only go up 5 pounds based upon APRE. So adding an arbitrary amount of weight and utilizing APRE. The third way is to just use an autoregulation, meaning we have an RPE scale of 1 to 10, and this is something that I've been using a little bit lately. If we have an RPE scale of 1 to 10, 1 meaning little effort, 10 meaning absolute max effort, 9 meaning we could do 1 more repetition, 8, 2 more repetitions. On your last set, just record an RPE. Let's say you have 8 sets of 4 on that last day, and you record an RPE of 7. That means you could do 3 more repetitions. So it means it was pretty easy. So you could maybe take an aggressive 10 to 15 pound increase for the following week, and you should, so RPE should still be submaximal. But let's say on the 8 sets of 4, you record an RPE of 10 on that last set. Well, you might want to keep the weight the same or jump just a little bit, maybe 5 pounds, as to not go up too much. So I know that was a lot at one time, but the 3 options of progression that we just gave you were 1, adding an arbitrary amount of weight, 2, utilizing APRE, which is essentially a utilization of a plus or as many reps as possible set and progressing based upon how many reps you get, or an auto-regulation on a scale of 1 to 10. The lower the number on the scale is, the more aggressive the jump you take for the following week. So that's how you could progress from week to week. And you can also auto-regulate and add weeks or decrease weeks. If I write a training block for 4 weeks and an 8-6-4 undulation, and let's say on week 4, the planned last week, this individual is still getting 10, 11, 12 reps on that last week, well, I might go another week because they're doing great. There's no reason to stop. But if after 3 weeks they can barely complete the protocol, I might taper early, right, and get some recovery and then go toward the next block. So you can not only auto-regulate how much weight you're using that day or each week, or how much you're going to increase for the next week, but you can even auto-regulate, hey, do I want to do another week or is it time to taper? So the possibilities are really endless.
Yeah, it seems like a common thread with DUP, endless possibilities.
Absolutely, man. If you're still waiting for the DUP download, I have bad news. It's like the magic supplement; it doesn't exist.
Yes, give me the DUP. I'm gonna actually change gears here. We could talk about this stuff forever, but you have some very interesting concepts regarding cardio, and I know you're engaged in a study right now on cardio. And so we're definitely going to have you back on in the future just because we're not going to get to everything we want to in an hour show. But can you give us, talk about your study that you're doing right now with regards to cardio, and if you have any thoughts on what you think the results.
Okay, so that's a great question about our study. And this study that we're going to embark on, which is going to start in January, is the thesis project of one of my students, Chad Dolan, who has done a great job, and some of you guys may even know his name. So Chad's thesis is going to be looking at various cardio models of training, if you will, along with resistance training, to look at body composition and strength and hypertrophy over the course of about 8 weeks or so. So the way this will work is there will be 3 groups. Each group will do the same exact daily undulating periodization training protocol on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Now, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturdays will be the quote-unquote cardio days. So group 1 will do a more traditional steady-state protocol. We'll do HIIT, or high-intensity interval training. And then group 3, instead of doing HIIT or steady-state, will simply just lift more weights. And that weight training program will be designed in a circuit fashion, so more of a metabolic type of circuit training on those days. So we're going to equate for time, and the question is, which of these is going to be not only best for body composition, but really skeletal muscle quality, strength, and hypertrophy? So if somebody was in prep, is it really advantageous for them to do some sort of cardio or HIIT, or could they not do this and replace it with some sort of circuit training, which would not only accomplish the task of caloric expenditure, but also would simply mean more training volume? And with more training volume, would that translate into more growth over that time? I think it's a really interesting question, and I think that the world, or the figure bodybuilding world that I've been gotten to know a little bit over the last few years has moved, in a lot of part thanks to Lane and Ben and others that are doing such a good job, to doing HIIT rather than steady state cardio. And I think that's a good thing, and I think that's been pretty well accepted recently, and I think that's great. Certainly HIIT does not have any negative effects on training. But if we go back to our skeletal muscle quality, but if we go back to our question, is it optimal? Well, if you're trying to be good at lifting weights, then maybe you should just lift more weights. So if you can't squat or deadlift or something because you were sore from doing HIIT, then my question is, why are you doing that? What if you just replaced that day with a weak body part or did something in a circuit fashion and you were able to accomplish the same task. So as Mr. Esgro always says, are you doing cardio because you want to, or are you doing it because you think you have to? It's possible that you don't have to. I do want to say, though, that this study is in its infancy so far, and I could be entirely, our hypothesis could be entirely wrong. I have no idea. And one of the reasons that I wanted to get Lane in on the study is that he doesn't necessarily fully agree with me. And that's awesome. You're not going to always agree. And if he has another position, that's great. That's a great thing, because we can make sure we design an appropriate protocol, and then we can really see what happens and find the answer. The other thing that's also going to be interesting is that the steady state group is only cycling for 30 minutes. How detrimental is that really going to be? Right? There is still limited research that compares HIIT to steady state in itself. So what will we find? I don't know. And the point is that we don't care what we find. Whatever we find is going to be awesome and hopefully advance our knowledge of what we can do, whatever happens. So I think it's a really cool study, and Chad, along with some of my other students, Justin and Alex, are doing a great job, and Tony, of getting that going. So we'll see what happens, and hopefully, maybe a year from now, 9 months from now, whenever it's done, Lane, on Physique Science Radio episode, 72, whatever it is, we can come back on and talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will tell you that I am becoming much more of a fan of specificity. So I don't know that I would say we disagree in what we think might happen, but I do know that sometimes you do research and you have this idea, it makes sense, your hypothesis makes sense, and then it ends up being the exact opposite of what you think it's going to be. Yeah. So that's why I tell people, like, it's always a good idea. It's an important thing with science. Like, it's fine to have a hypothesis, and it's fine to say, hey, here's why I think this hypothesis is what it is. Yeah. But eventually you have to test that hypothesis, right? Sure. So this is why I tell people, like, with regards to like fasted cardio, for example, yes, there is data showing that if you do fasted cardio, you burn a greater percentage of fat from stored fat. Okay, great. But people will take that and they'll say, well, that means it's going to cause you to lose more body fat. No, right. That's not what that study said. Okay. And when they actually examined fat loss, they see no difference between fed cardio and fasted cardio. Okay. Sure. And that is shown because you actually get less of a thermogenic response when you do fasted cardio. So, but the point being that you have to test a hypothesis. It's not just good enough to say, well, I think this is what it is, right? And so I think that's something that's important for our young scientists out there and our listeners. It's okay to have a hypothesis, but you got to test it. And that's exactly, a good scientist puts their money where their mouth is. And that's what Mike is doing. So, Mike, do you have anybody you want to thank or acknowledge or anything before we let you go?
I'll just keep this really brief and mention a few people. My students, the guys I just mentioned, Chad Dolan, Alex Klemp, who just went on to do his PhD and graduated, Justin Keelace, Tony Krawinkel. These guys have been helping in the research lab. Really appreciate them. My colleagues around here, other professors and instructors, I really appreciate. My research mentor back at Florida State, Dr. Kim, who really, I can't say enough good things, such a good person, taught me so much. And then Matt Gary, Susie Hartwig-Gary, and Mike Teixeira, along with their good friend Ben Esgro, and Eric Helms, all these people who I've pulled information from and really been fortunate to meet and talk with, and Dr. Mike Ormsby up at Florida State as well. So all those people, just want to say very much thanks to them, and with everything, along with my wife, who's a very good scientist in her own right. And Lane, to you, man, for having me on, and Sohi, who couldn't be here today. But, you inspired so many of us in this field. And like I said, I stalked you for years before you knew who I was. So I appreciate you having me on. It's an honor, man, and I hope to be back.
Well, the honor's all ours, Mike. I appreciate it. You flatter me as always. And we got through an hour and no talk about the Federal Reserve or anything like that. So I think
two things. I neglected my friend Dr. Lineker, who we talk about here all the time. But if we want to talk about monetary policy and the state of the world on this fiat currency that we have, and I could do that real quick. It'd be great if the market could set interest rates for once.
I think we'll skip it for now. But when we have our political show on, when we have our own political show, we'll bring you on.
Sounds good, brother. I look forward to it.
Norton Zourdos, 2020.
I don't think we would win, but I'm all in.
All right, Mike. Well, it's great talking to you. I hope listeners, I hope you enjoyed our episode with Dr. Mike Zourdos. This is Physique Science Radio. We'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for listening.